For the Texas real estate exam, you must master the 5 primary ways a contract can be terminated. Let's start with the buyer's most powerful tool, the option period. This is a negotiated number of days for which the buyer pays a non-refundable option fee, giving them the unrestricted right to terminate for any reason. To do this, the buyer must provide the seller with written notice of termination by 5 p.m. on the final day of the option period. If they follow this procedure exactly, the earnest money is refunded to the buyer. The exam will test you on that strict 5 p.m. deadline and the fact that the option fee is kept by the seller, while the earnest money is returned to the buyer. Next is termination due to financing failure. This is governed by the Third-Party Financing Addendum. If the buyer cannot obtain financing approval within the number of days specified in the addendum, they can terminate the contract and their earnest money will be refunded. The key exam trap here is that the buyer must have made a good faith effort to obtain the loan. They can't just change their mind and claim financing fell through. Proper and timely notice is, again, critical. Another common termination method involves title defects. The title company will issue a title commitment. If it reveals issues like undisclosed easements, liens, or boundary disputes, the buyer has a right to object. The seller then has a period, known as the cure period, to resolve these issues. If the seller cannot cure the defects within the specified time, the buyer may terminate the contract and receive a refund of their earnest money. The exam will expect you to know that the buyer's right to terminate is contingent on the seller's failure to cure the defects within that cure period. Sometimes both parties simply agree to part ways. This is called termination by mutual agreement. Both the buyer and seller must sign a written release agreement, often the release of earnest money form, to officially terminate the contract. This agreement dictates who gets the earnest money. Without this signed release from both parties, the title company cannot release the funds. Finally, let's discuss default. If a party fails to comply with a contractual obligation, they are in default. For example, if the buyer simply fails to show up for closing without a valid reason, they are in default. In this case, the seller can terminate the contract and is typically entitled to keep the earnest money as liquidated damages. Conversely, if the seller defaults, for instance, by refusing to make agreed-upon repairs, the buyer can terminate and sue for damages or specific performance, and they are entitled to a return of their earnest money. A critical exam point is that termination is not automatic upon a default. The non-defaulting party must deliver written notice of termination. To remember the buyer's key termination rights that lead to an earnest money refund, think of the acronym FOT. That's financing, option period, and title defects. If one of these goes wrong for the buyer, they can often get out with their earnest money. For free practice questions, AI-powered explanations, and more exam prep tools, visit openexamprep.com. That's openexamprep, all one word, .com.